For decades, the message has been super clear. Nicotine is bad for you. It's the enemy. But what if? What if that isn't the whole story? We're going to dive into this really strange paradox where thousands of people are looking at this exact substance, not as a poison, but as a potential cure.
Yeah, it's a wild question, right? It goes against pretty much everything we've ever been taught. But this isn't just some random thought experiment. For a whole lot of people, this is a very personal, very urgent question.
So you have these people facing this awful, debilitating illness with very few good treatment options. And a huge patient-led movement has basically decided we're not waiting around anymore. They're taking matters into their own hands, one nicotine patch at a time. Okay, so to really get how this whole thing blew up, you got to start with the people. It's their powerful personal stories that kicked off this whole grassroots movement and offered what felt like a totally unlikely glimmer of hope.
So check this out. This data from a small case series is what really got the ball rolling. Look at this, a 19-year-old whose weakness got better in just days, a 31-year-old reporting a full physical recovery in under a month, a 41-year-old who felt fatigue and headaches just vanish in a single day. I mean, these aren't small changes. People were reporting these huge, life-altering improvements and fast.
And this quote, this really hits home what those numbers actually mean for someone's life. Now, if you don't know, counting spoons is a way people with chronic illness talk about managing their tiny reserves of energy. So when patient advocate Troy Rooch says this, it's not just about feeling a little sharper. It's about getting back the basic mental energy just to get through the day. It's huge. And we are not talking about a handful of people in a chat room. This number, that's the membership of the Nicotine Test Facebook group. We're talking tens of thousands of people sharing what's happening to them, sharing their own data. It's basically citizen science on a scale that's, well, it's just impossible to ignore. Okay, so the stories are incredible. But how? How could this possibly be working? Is there any real science that could actually explain what these people are feeling? Well, the main theory all comes down to these things: nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. The easiest way to think of them is like little docking stations all over your body, on your brain cells, your immune cells, everywhere. They're a super important part of your body's entire communication system. And as it turns out, they might be right at the center of the COVID story. So the most popular idea, especially in the patient community, is something they call the displacement theory. And it's actually pretty straightforward. Step 1. The theory goes that the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein gums up the works by attaching to these docking stations, blocking them. Step 2. Nicotine comes along, and because it has a way stronger attraction to that docking station, it basically shoves the spike protein out of the way. And step 3, the blocker is gone, the receptor can work like normal again, and maybe the symptoms get better. But hold on, it might not be that simple. See, nicotine is a pretty powerful molecule, and it does a lot of different things in the body. It can act as a potent anti-inflammatory. It's known to boost brain chemicals like dopamine, which helps with focus and mood. It can even activate something called the vagus nerve, which helps control everything from your heart rate to digestion. So really, any one of these things could be playing a part here. All right, the stories are compelling. The theories, they make some sense. But now comes the reality check. What happens when you put all these anecdotes up against formal, rigorous clinical evidence? And this slide just lays out that conflict so perfectly. On one side, you've got thousands of positive, personal stories online, a few small but promising case studies. But then you look at the other side, the hard scientific evidence, and it's a different picture. There are no large-scale clinical trials for long COVID. The whole mechanism is still just a theory. And that early idea about a smoker's paradox, turns out that was pretty misleading. And then there's this, probably the biggest piece of counter-evidence we have right now. A big, serious clinical trial in France looked at using nicotine patches on the absolute sickest COVID patients, people on ventilators. The result? No survival benefit. None. Now, it's important to say this was for severe acute COVID, not the chronic long COVID we're talking about, but it does show that when this theory was put to the test in a really serious setting, it just didn't hold up. So yeah, this quote from medical journalist Esme Fahmy really nails where the scientific community is at right now. The evidence is mixed, the jury is out. These stories are interesting, for sure, but without big, proper, controlled studies, we just don't know if these effects are real, if they're reliable, or if it's all a placebo effect. So even with no solid proof, people are still trying this. Which brings us to the really practical side of this whole experiment, the very real risks and the unofficial rules the community has developed to try and stay safe.
And let's be super clear here, there are potential downsides. Common stuff includes things like nausea, really vivid dreams, skin rashes. But more seriously, nicotine is a stimulant. It can raise your heart rate, raise your blood pressure, which is why experts say people with any kind of heart condition need to be extremely careful. And remember, we really don't have much safety data on what long-term nicotine use does to non-smokers. Now, to manage these risks, the patient community came up with its own sort of protocol. And I have to say this again, and it's so important. This is not medical advice. They stress using patches only to get a slow, steady dose, not the addictive hit from gum or vapes. And the mantra is start low and go slow. Begin with the smallest patch, maybe even cut it in half for just a few hours. And the most critical step, always talk to a doctor before you even think about starting. And just to put a fine point on it, here's the official bottom line. The world's biggest health organizations, the WHO and the CDC, are on the same page here. They say there is simply no evidence right now to support using nicotine for COVID-19 unless you are part of a formal clinical trial.
So, where does all this leave us? Well, it leaves us in this fascinating, kind of messy place, trying to make sense of something that is at the same time a pretty risky experiment and, for some people, a source of incredible hope.
I think this really gets to the heart of it. You have millions of people suffering, right now, with very few proven treatments. And in this giant gap between their desperate need for help and the slow, careful pace of science, that's where this whole movement was born.
And that leaves us with one last really big question. This whole thing is about way more than just nicotine. It's about what happens when patients feel like the system has left them behind. It makes you ask, when you're in the uncharted territory of a brand new illness and all the old maps are useless, who gets to be the one to draw the new ones?